never really know just what you want.
In the early 80s, young girls were being abducted right off the streets of northern Ohio. 2 men were wrongly convicted, but a young woman that escaped the clutches of a serial killer would come forward and ID a man by the name of Robert Buell, whom would eventually be connected by DNA to 2 of these abducted girls' brutal torture, rape, and horrific murders. And although tied to a third murder, it was never proven. These string of murders began with 8-year-old Asenath Ducott, who was murdered on June 3rd, 1980. And there were about a dozen murders of girls in northern Ohio around this time. This is the true crime story of a truly sadistic man named Robert Buell. So join me for Suspense She Shed Sunday. Hello, my name is Holly, and this is The Murder She Shed, the place we discuss the dead right from my she shed. Come join us anytime for rarely discussed true crime right from my she shed. Just a warning, this crime case involves graphic crime scene images and essay of young girls and also torture of women. If that will be too heavy for you, and it is indeed heavy, then check out one of my previous videos on my channel. Now, whoever's still around, let's begin. On October 16, 1993, in the town of Damascus, Ohio, a young 28-year-old gas station manager named Debbie was closing up after having a hard day at work. She was tired and was just ready to crawl into her warm bed. She always kept her keys out when leaving, so she could quickly get into her car due to it being dark. When she left work, she just always felt kind of leery walking to her vehicle. As Debbie neared her vehicle, she didn't see the dark figure lurking at the side of the gas station. And before she even knew what happened, a man grabbed her from behind and pointed a gun to her head. He then yelled, "Don't move, you're coming with me unless you want your head blown off." He forced Debbie into his vehicle. Debbie was terrified, unable to move or speak. She started trembling from the fear of the thought of what could happen to her next. Then they drove for what seemed like an hour to the town of Clinton, Ohio. The man then got out and pushed her into the garage of a house, which she assumed to be his home. He told her to get undressed. Fearing for her life, she did as he asked. He then chained Debbie to a weightlifting bench and went inside the house. He came back quickly with a razor and shaving cream and began to shave all of her hair off of her head. After he accomplished this task, he RAP'd her. After the assault was finished, he then cut the wires of a lamp he had in the garage and used these wires to electrocute her all over her whole body. Then he began to beat her on the head and stomach. This seemed to excite him, and he SA'd her again. He then forced her to drink his semen and urine, whipped her until she bled externally and internally. He then suffocated her with a plastic bag over her head until she passed out. He then revived her and repeated this act over and over again. The last time she woke up, the man was not in the garage. She looked around and her blood was everywhere, on the walls, the weight bench, and even on the ceiling of the garage. She knew he was going to kill her eventually after he tired of his tortures. Her whole body hurt, but she still attempted to loosen her chains. She didn't get to attempt very long before the man came back into the garage. This time, he was now dressed in a suit. He told her it was 8 a.m. and he had to go to work. She realized the man had been torturing her for 10 long hours. He jerked her up and took her into the house. She thought he was going to kill her now, and she began to pray for protection. He led her to his bed where he tied each limb to all 4 bedposts. He told Debbie, "I'll be back from work in 3 hours. If you try to escape, I will find you and kill you." As she heard his footsteps leave the house and shut the front door, she knew whether she attempted to escape or not, he was going to come back and kill her because she had saw his face, knew where he lived. This was her last chance of living. She had to do it now. She struggled against her restraint. She had even considered the thought of gnawing off her thumb in order to free herself, but eventually she was able to free her right hand. Only problem, her left hand was not tied with a rope. It was secured with a metal handcuff. So she just untied her legs first with only her one hand. After she was free, except for this one handcuff, she debated what she could do next. She finally decided that she would try just to pull her hand through the frame of the handcuff. She squeezed her fingers and thumbs together as tight as she could and just kept pulling. Her hand became bloody and bruised, but miraculously, she managed to pull her hand free from that cuff. It had taken Debbie 2 hours to free herself, so she knew that he could come back any time. She snatched a bathrobe she had seen hanging, quickly put it on, and ran outside barefooted. After Debbie made it outside, she didn't know which way to run because she wasn't sure even what town she was in. Debbie got down on her knees and said, "God, I need a sign. I need help." And right at that time, she heard a poodle barking. She ran as fast as she could to the bark, and it was coming from inside a house. So she knocked. An elderly woman slowly opened the door and took one look at Debbie's bloody body and ushered her into the house, bolted the door shut, and closed all the curtains. She then gave Debbie food and water and, of course, called the police. One of the officers that showed up at this scene would later say that Debbie was so bruised it looked like she was wearing deep purple underwear. Debbie was able to point them to the house she had escaped from, and they hid outside his home just waiting for him to come home from work. They didn't have to wait long because he came home just exactly 3 hours, like he said, at about 11 a.m. The officers were shocked to learn that her attacker was Robert Anthony Buell, a highly respected resident of Clinton, Ohio. The families in Clinton would soon learn that Robert might just be a serial killer, and his double life would shock the whole town when they learned just how unsafe their children were. Robert Buell was born in Norwood, Ohio in 1940. He had just recently divorced and had a teenage daughter. Robert had previously served in the Navy, but now worked for the city of Akron as the aide in their planning department. He also had recently began dating a local attorney in Clinton. He was known as friendly but eccentric. Robert had a neatly manicured yard with perfect chrysanthemums that lined his sidewalk. Trust me, never trust a man that seems so perfect. Something isn't right. He had a certain charm about him and could make you laugh with his sense of humor. He was often seen attending softball games at the local middle school, where he would cheer on his girlfriend's 2 daughters. Officers began to dig into Robert's past and first seen where he was arrested for public indecency for flashing a group of women in 1978. Then after seeing Robert's picture in a paper, a 29-year-old woman named Patricia came forward from West Virginia and told officers while she was visiting Ohio in May of 22nd, 1983, Robert had SA'd her and tortured her for 4 days in his home before releasing her. Patricia said that Robert had offered her a ride in his van, and after she got in, he put a GUN to her head and said, "You effed up this time." He then forced her in the back of the van and handcuffed her. He then forced her to undress and get into the wheel well of the van, placing a heavy board on top so she couldn't get out. He drove Patricia to his house and handcuffed her to his bed. He then essayed her with a beer bottle. Patricia blacked out from the pain. He then RAP'd her. During the attack, he bit her several times on private areas. He then forced her into the shower and tied her to the bed again before heading to work. After 4 days of torture, he told her he would let her go. He covered her head with a pillowcase and dropped her off on a secluded road. Officers learned that an attempted abduction of a young girl had occurred on May 10, 1983, but her mother had gotten the license plate number and it had been retraced back to Robert's ex-wife's car. Then in March of 1983, there was an attempted abduction of two girls, 12 and 13 years of age. They were able to ID Robert after he was already caught for Debbie's assault. Officers began to wonder if Robert could have been involved in some murders of young girls that had disappeared in the northern Ohio area. They realized that his maroon van matched the description of the one seen abducting 11-year-old Krista Harrison. Krista was the youngest of Gerald and Shirley Harrison's 4 children. She was fun-loving and very athletic. She loved to play softball. And the day of her abduction on July 17, 1982, her and her friend Roy was cleaning up the ballpark by picking up some aluminum cans. It also was a great way to make some extra cash. Roy was all the way at the other end of the park when he seen the maroon van pull up and a man exited his vehicle and went to sit on the bleachers. Roy continued to pick up cans, and the next time he looked up, he seen that Krista was talking to the man. Minutes later, he seen the man attempt to put his hands up Krista's shirt, but she jerked away and got on her bike in order to leave. He then seen the man whisper something to Krista, and she suddenly got off her bike and got into the man's van. It was so quick that before Roy could get over to them, they were already gone. Roy then hopped on Krista's bike to go tell her parents what had occurred at the park. 6 days later, her nude body was found down a dirt road beside a shed. Warning, graphic images are now going to be shown. The autopsy would reveal a brutal essay by thrusting of some kind of rigid object, and she was RIP'd as well. Her feet were bound with large pieces of plastic and tape. She had been slashed across the head with a razor that had taken off part of her scalp. Krista had been strangled to death. Her hair and clothing had pieces of orange carpet fibers in them. This was the key to his arrest. Around in the same area as her body, investigators found a man's pair of painted spotted jeans and 2 gloves. They had the orange carpet fibers in them too. And also a beach towel with orange carpet fibers was found. Down the road, a clump of hair. A green garbage bag with tape on it, as well as 2 pieces of cardboard boxes with the shipping label sprayed over with black spray paint. They could see that part of the label said Sears. Some of these materials had orange fibers too. Later, a man brought them a shirt he had found in the road in which the label said Mike's Place on it. Investigators would soon find out that the plastic found on Krista's feet and the cardboard were packing materials used for van seats sold by Sears. Robert was never linked to Krista's murder at that time, but they did arrest him for Debbie's assault. They executed a search warrant at his house and found some evidence that would finally link him to Krista's murder. They found black spray paint, a shirt labeled with Mike's place tag, a roll of orange-colored carpeting, a newspaper with Krista's picture on it. It was a gotcha kind of moment for the officers. Robert's nephew told them Robert had installed the same orange carpet that was found in the house in his van too. After testing these fibers, they were all found to match the fibers found on Krista's body and the other items found at the crime scene. On November 15, 1983, he was charged with aggravated murder, kidnapping, and SI. The officers soon learned that in a previous case of a 12-year-old girl named Tina Harmon, who was murdered a year earlier, they had arrested the wrong suspects. But now they realized that these same orange fibers that had been found in Krista's case had also been on Tina. So they knew definitely they had the wrong suspects, and now they knew who the right man was. Tina was in 6th grade and lived in Creston, Ohio at the time of her abduction in October 29, 1981. At 12, like most teens, she often rebelled against authority. Although she was a little rebel, she had made good grades at school. She loved cats and loved to sing. She was starting to show an interest in boys and had lots of friends. The day of her abduction, she asked her father's girlfriend if she could drop her off at a truck stop nearby. She would often go there to smoke a cigarette with her friends and play video arcade games. After her and her friends then hung out all afternoon at the truck stop playing games, they got the idea to go to one of the girls' house and spend the night. So around 6:30 p.m., they began walking to the girls' house. Tina started craving a fudgesicle and decided to stop at a local convenience store and buy her one. She told her friends they didn't have to wait on her. She would catch up with them. So 2 days before Halloween, Tina disappeared. Her body wouldn't be found until November 3rd by a young man deer hunting. He was walking in a field in the tiny village of Navarre, where he came across a girl laying in the field fully clothed and laying face up on the ground. This body was soon learned to be Tina's, and when her mother was told, she fainted. The autopsy would show Tina suffered a violent death. Semen was found on her dress and in her panties. Her private area had suffered extensive injuries and had been SA'd and RAP'd. She had bruises and cuts on her ankles and wrists from being bound, and also bruises on her face and arms from trying to fight her attacker off. She had rope burns on her neck where the killer had tried to strangle her with a rope before just giving up and using his hands. She had the same orange fibers on her body, like I said, as well as dog hairs. But they didn't think Robert had a dog. They did learn from the neighbors that Robert had owned a dog which recently had died and was buried in his backyard. So what they do, they dug up the dog just to see if the hairs matched, and they did match. The 2 men that were in prison for Tina's murder only were put there just due to some witnesses that had came forward and had pointed the finger at them. But no other evidence had even been shown during their trial. So they were acquitted soon after Robert was tied to Tina's murder. Robert Buell would deny that he had murdered either girl all the way till he was put to death. Robert was not officially known to have murdered Tina until a DNA test was done in 2008, and then he was proven to be the man who brutally and sadistically murdered her. He was only put on death row for Krista's murder. He was strongly suspected of murdering 10-year-old Deborah K. Smith, who was abducted in the summer of 1983 from a carnival she had attended with her brother, but was never convicted. Aseneth Ducott, nicknamed Sini, an 8-year-old that lived a couple of hours away from Robert's home, because her murder was similar to the other 3 girls' murder in that she was strangled and brutally SA'd while walking home from school. Robert was considered a suspect, but never strongly suspected. 2 other men that lived local to where Cini was murdered were suspected more than Robert of her murder. Her case was just closed a few days ago. After 42 years, the suspect was identified through DNA as Brent Stratner, who killed himself in Columbus in June of 1984 at the age of 24. Just 4 years after he murdered Cini, he took his own life. I hope he suffered extreme guilt, and that is what caused him to take his life. There are many more girls that were murdered in northern Ohio during that time that still remain unsolved. Robert remained on death row for 18 years before Robert was led to the execution chamber. On September 24, 2002, he requested an odd last meal, a single black unpitted olive. When asked what his last words were, Robert didn't look at Krista's family when he spoke. He took several deep breaths, looked up at the ceiling, and said, "Jerry and Shirley, I didn't kill your daughter. They left the real killer out on the street to kill again and again and again. So that some good can come out of this, I ask you to continue to pursue this to the end and force them to find out who really killed your daughter. That's all I have to say." And 2 minutes later, Robert Buell was pronounced dead, dying in a peaceful way compared to the way in which he made his victims die. I am so happy for the families of Tina Harmon and Sina Ducat that DNA technology helped give them answers to what happened to their little girls, but there are many more girls that still have families with no answers during the 80s in northern Ohio that could have been the victim of Robert Buell or even Brent Stratner, or even the evil man that is still out on the street preying on victims. I pray that these families get their answers soon. All right, guys, this was a difficult one to get through, so I'm going to leave you with a blooper clip, and hopefully maybe that'll cheer you up just a bit. All right, I love you guys, and I hope you'll have a blessed week, and I hope you have a great Sunday, and have enjoyed your weekend, and peace, blessings, and love. Bye. This began with 8-year-old as he told her to not undress, to get undressed. She seemed. He then forced. He jerked her. He jerked her up. Jerk. You're such a jerk. You a jerk. Anthony Buell, a highly Robert Anthony Buell. Buell. That's right. Highly respected resident of Clinton, Ohio. I gotta do it again. Robert Buell was born in Norwood, Ohio. Did I just screw up once again, or I didn't want to? We are gonna freaking try this again. It's pissing me off today. Robert Buell was born in Norwood, Ohio. Oh shit! What can I say, Ohio today? What the heck? Now worked for the city of Akron. Just stuttering all over the place here. But I'm going to say shit because I say it so much. I might almost say shit. I'm not sure. I see Samo coming. There goes my baby. There goes my baby boy. Fluffy, big old fuzzy guy. He's like holding a big teddy bear. All right, let's go. What do you want to do? You want to go boom, boom, boom?